into the Gospel of Mark. Chapter 5. Verse 18 to 20. The Gospel of Mark, chapter 5, verses 18 to 20. As Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed begged to go with him. Jesus did not let him, but said, "Go home to your family and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." So the man went away and began to tell in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and all the people were amazed. I would like to talk about a living testimony. A living testimony. Pray with me. Father, need you to help me. Beg you to help them. And together we will rejoice in what your word has said to all of us. In Jesus the Christ we say amen. A living testimony. Last week we found out in the Gospel of Mark that Jesus was always on the move. Not only was he on the move, we realized that he had authority and he had a crowd always around him. During his journey, he had already begun to do his own ministry. The ministry where he healed the man who was paralyzed. We found out that the teachers of the law were always testing him because they could not understand all that Jesus was doing. And then after teaching some parables and some of his lessons, Jesus get on a boat to cross on the other side of the sea along with his disciples. I used to think that while he was on the boat with his disciples, that the only persons who knew about what took place on the boat and in the sea was Jesus and his disciples. For the longest, that stayed in my mind. But there was another witness, y'all. There was another witness while Jesus and his disciples were on the boat. There was a witness up in the mountain inside of a hole that was cut out. And inside this hole, this man who we know nothing about besides his situation was crying out day in and day out. He was on that cliff inside that hole, and he was chained by hands, and he was chained by feet. Can you hear the clanging of the chains? Can you hear a man that is in agony and in pain screaming out, "Help me, please"? He has lost his mind. And there are other folk talking to him in his own mind. He's being torn not by someone else, but he's being torn by himself. And if the truth be told, we don't know anything about this man but his situation. He could have been, for the lack of better words, he could have been one of the richest men in the countryside of Jerusalem. We don't know. He could have been one of the great teachers of the synagogue. We don't know. He could have been a farmer who had massive land. We really don't know who he is. We don't know where he came from. We don't know how much he had, how much he lost. We don't know anything about this man but two words. He is demon possessed. What a sad, sad, sad description of a person. Demon possessed. And I struggle with this. Why couldn't you not tell me more about this brother? But the truth be told, part of the problem, even with the church, is when we see someone in a condition, we're more concerned about how they got to the condition. When we see someone who is hurt and in pain, we want to know, well, how did you get there? When we see someone who is struggling, who have lost this or who have lost that, we always want to know, well, what tell me before I help you. How did you get there? You can't pay your bill? How did you get there? You don't have food on your table? How did you get there? As if how they got there makes a difference. The only thing sometimes we need to know is the condition that they are in. Amen. And here we have a man who is chained up. And listen to the description of this man. When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an evil spirit came from the tombs to meet him. This man lived, got there. So what I'll do, I'll just ostracize you. Can't figure out why you feel the way you feel. I don't know why you are transgender, so I'll just put you to the side of the nowhere. Can't figure out why you dealing with your own sexuality, so since I cannot figure it out, and since the laws that I think I feel like preaching right now, and since I think of the laws that I know and believe does not match up with my own theology, and I no longer can handle you, I'll put you off to the side. That's no different even when we learn about our own Black History Month. They could not handle us as black folks. So what do? They put us up in the balcony because they could not handle us. All right, talk now. Talk. It's amazing how when we can't handle somebody, we push them to the side. They tried to bind the man, but that no longer worked. And the man was in so much pain and torture that he even broke the chains and he began to cut his own body. An awesome, horrific picture of a man. And I don't want to go over quickly about the man and whether or not he was demon possessed. The scripture says he was demon possessed. But what I want us to understand that in some sense, this is how a person look who has been dealing with sin. We see a perfect picture of a wretched state of the sinner. Look at it. The sinners have fallen to the snare of the devil. And so many signs of a sinner. Listen to it. The sinner often injure him or herself. You do know that sin has only one purpose: to make sure you injure yourself. That's all sin really is. It takes a chip off of you every now and then until it gets to the core of your spirit. Amen. You know that sin. That sin you don't want anyone else to know. That sin that you cannot shake. That sin that you cannot get off of your back. That sin that you cannot hide. That sin that you've been struggling with day in and day out. Talking to your own self, trying to rationalize why you do the same thing over and over and over again. Why do I keep on cussing over and over and over again? Why do I keep on getting mad over and over and over again? Why do I keep on abusing my wife over and over and over again? Why don't I have a relationship with my son or my daughter over and over again? Those thoughts are in you. Does it sound like that, man? Sin has a way of chipping everything from us. And not only does sin has a way of injuring ourselves, but sin is often harmful to others. And let me pause right there, because see, most of us believe that our sin only deals with ourselves. But the truth be told, your sin has an effect on everybody else. And see, that's the danger about sin. Not only does it injure you, but your sin can injure me. And most often the sin that we have sometimes even pass on down to some of our children. Not only does sin bother you, it often harms others. See, they were so scared of the man, they could not hold him down. So therefore, every time he broke a piece, he would elbow one and elbow another one. See, it was hurting others. And not only that, but sometimes sin have you to be unfit to be around. Have you ever seen someone so down and so drowned and overwhelmed about sin that they are often unfit to even communicate around other folk because they are so consumed by their own sin? Does not make sense, but listen. Jesus said in the 4th chapter or 2nd chapter says that no one can enter a strong man's house and carries out his possession unless the first thing he does is ties up the strong man. Then he can rob his house. You do know that that's what sin does. Sin enters into your house, and sin never enters into your house through the front door. Sin enters into your house the back door. And when it enters your house the back door, then it ties you up. And after it ties you up, it steals all of the possessions are in your house. Well, what can sin steal from my house? And now remind you, I'm not talking about the house in which you live in. I'm talking about the temple in which you have. What happens when sin enters into your temple through the back door? What does sin begin to steal and rob? Well, I found out that when sin enters into the back door, that sin begins to rob you and steal your joy. That sin begins to rob you and steal your peace. That sin begins to rob you and steal your kindness. Sin begins to rob you and even steal your own Christianity. That's what happens when sin comes in to the back door and it creeps up on you. It don't always take you at one shot. Before you look, your feet is bound up. And then after your feet is bound up, then your hands are bound up. And then after your hands are bound up, then your mouth is bound up. And therefore sin begins to destroy you slowly but surely. That's what sin does. And listen, as soon as Jesus gets off the boat, the man runs to his feet. And that's where I learned that there was another witness about what took place on the sea. Because how did he know to go to Jesus when Jesus got off the boat? He was in the tomb in the mountain, and he looked down and he saw where Jesus calmed down the wind. He was in the mountain, in that hole, looking in his own insane mind, looking at Jesus on the water. And all of a sudden, he saw the wind blow and the disciples getting nervous. And he saw Jesus says, hush to the wind. He saw that, so then he knew there's something special about this man. So he meets this man at the sea, at the shore, when Jesus gets out of the boat, and he falls before Jesus' feet. Listen to what he says. He says, what do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? Swear to God that you won't torture me. For Jesus has said to him, come out of this man, you evil spirit. And here we have a dialogue between Jesus and two other people. Amen. Jesus said, what is your name? No. Jesus begins to talk to the demon. What is your name? Or is Jesus talking to the man? Which one is Jesus talking to? Is he talking to the demon? Or is he talking to the man? And let's look at this. The demon responds and says, my name is Legion. Now, I used to think that what he meant was the reality that there was so many demons in him that it was the amount of a legion. And legions was around 6,000. So therefore, in some words, the demon was saying, listen, Jesus, I have 6,000 folk behind me. And if you truly want to know my name, I'll tell you that my name is Legion. But what he really was trying to do was get Jesus to be scared. You sure you want to have a conversation with me? Because if you want to have a conversation with me, let me tell you who I have with me. Oh, I want to pause there because so many folk want to have conversations with some folk. And they always want to talk about who they know. And they always want to talk about how many folk they know. And they always want to talk about the crowd of folk they have with them. And all that was taking place was the same thing with Jesus, but he's dealing with some demons. And listen to I noticed that Jesus did not respond to him. Because Jesus never said anything back to him. Because what Jesus could have done could have went down to rank and file. Since you want to declare that you are Legion, then let's go down to who is the head person in charge of this legion. Who is the sergeant in charge of this legion? And who is the private in charge of this legion? But Jesus never really responded to his name. He said, my name is Legion, for we are many. And he begged Jesus again not to send them out of the area. I want to stop there because Jesus is faced with something that seems to be difficult. But then Jesus moved slowly. And when he moved slowly, he looked at the demon. And the demon said, well, if you're going to send somebody out, if you're going to send us out, then send us out to the pigs. Sin never wants to stay still. Sin never wants to be sitting still. Sin will rather go somewhere else if it cannot stay where it's at. And that's why they said, well, send me to the pigs, won't you? And then Jesus said, go to the pigs. But then we get to verse 18, because they says, well, verse 15 says, when they came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons sitting there dressed in his right mind, and they were afraid. What happens when the sinner is confronted with Jesus? What happens when your sin comes in contact with Jesus? When your sin comes in contact with Jesus, your sin cannot stay the same. You have to begin to repent your own sin. So then we find out in verse 15 that after Jesus came in contact with this demon-possessed man, such a horrific picture. That's all we know about this man, that he was demon-possessed. But when he came in contact with Jesus, he had come into his right mind. and his right attitude. Let's pause there because that's how I know how many folk come in contact with Jesus. By how they act, how they speak, how their disposition is. Oh, I know if you come in contact with Jesus. Because if you come in contact with Jesus, you won't look at me the same way you used to. If you come in contact with Jesus, you won't say what you used to say to me. If you come in contact with Jesus, you won't act the way you used to act, because it's impossible to come in contact with Jesus and still act the same way that you used to act before you came in contact with him. And then we get to this part where I found an interesting word. As Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been, and that's where I want to stop. That's the living testimony. The man who had been. I don't know what he used to be before he was possessed by the demons. But what I found out is after he came in contact with Jesus, the only thing that's important is who he had been. Because a living testimony is you can no longer look the same. You can no longer act the same until you come in contact with Jesus. And then you're just a demon-possessed man who had been. And that's the beauty of all of our relationship with Jesus. All of us are had-beens. And we live in a society where they want us to not be had-beens. I like to watch the show where they take old houses. And they look at the old houses and they look tore down. No chance of saving. No chance of salvation. No chance of remodeling. But there's always one person with the eye to look at the house and see it for what it could be. And I watch the show, and I know the show speeds up. You don't see it all in one shot. But it just amazes me how this house that was broken up in pieces, the inside was full of rags, and it just tore up. I mean, it just looked bad. It just looked terrible. It just looked like it had no sense. Let's just tear the house down. But there's one person who say, no, I see the possibility of the house. And that one person who sees the possibility of the house begins to work on the house. And when that person begins to work on the house, that house begins to become all that it ought to be. Well, that's all God ever does with any of us. He looks at us and he sees what we are, but at the same time, he understands what we shall be. So what God does is he begins to work on us. And when he begins to work on us, we begin to have our minds clothed right, and we begin to have our body become right. And therefore, what takes place in God's presence is something new about who we are. I'm not the same father that I used to be because God begins to work on me. I'm not the same husband I used to be because God begins to work on me. I'm not the same brother I used to be because God begins to work on me. So every time God begins to work on me, I'm a had-been person. You know about had-been persons. David was a had-been person until he came in contact with Jesus. And when he came in contact with God, he began to be something more than what he ever has been. You know about Paul. Paul was a had-been. But let me tell you about somebody personally. I used to be a had-been brother. I was a had-been brother in the streets. I was a had-been brother out there doing my own thing and working out my own stuff. I was a had-been crook, doing whatever I wanted to do whenever I needed to do it. I was a had-been person until I came in contact with Jesus. And when I came in contact with Jesus, I became a new creature, and a new creature indeed. I looked at my hands looked new. I looked at my feet were too. I turned around and I no longer looked the same because I came in contact with Jesus. And when you are a saved person and you have your
own salvation, you become a living witness for God. For look what God told the demon-possessed man. Well, the had-been demon-possessed man. He tells the had-been demon-possessed man, now go home and tell your family what I have done to you. That's part of our problems right there, that when God come in contact with us, we refuse to go home and tell those around us what God had done in our lives. Well, I just stopped by to let some of y'all know that God done some stuff in my life. And when he did it in my life, I went home and said, Kiki, the God that I know has done some work in my life. I looked at my son and said, Deshaun, God has done some work in my life. I looked at Kennedy and said, Kennedy, God has done some work in my life. I looked at my brother who was on crack and said, God has done some stuff in my life. And if he can change my life, he can change your life. And guess what? My brother who had been on crack is no longer on crack because he met the same God that I told him about. But I knew a brother who was worse than crack. I knew a sister who used to do some stuff. I looked at her and told her what God has done in my life. And after I told her what God has done in my life, then all of a sudden, that sister no longer did what she used to be because she was a had-been sister, a had-been in the streets, a had-been walking around doing whatever she wanted to do. When you come in contact with a living God, you can no longer do what you used to do. I'm almost done. One more point. Not only should you tell your family, but guess what else you need to tell your family? You need to tell your family how God has mercy on you. And all of us need to pause every now and then and say, God had mercy on me. I could have been dead, but God had mercy on me. I could have been sick, but God had mercy on me. I could have lost my mind, but God had mercy on me. I could have been destroyed, but God had mercy on me. That's the only reason I can preach his gospel, because God had mercy on me. That's the only reason I can do any pastoring, because God had mercy on me. That's the only reason I can walk the way I walk, because God had mercy on me. Nobody else had mercy on me. I cried all night long. I caught it to crazy all night long. But God came and he had mercy. That's why some of us are messed up right now, because we fail to realize who had mercy on us. That's why some of us are about to lose our minds, because we fail to realize who has mercy on us. Well, I'm tired of trying to lose my mind. I'm just looking at God who had mercy on me. And let me take you to where God had mercy on you at first. He had mercy on you when he was at Calvary. He had mercy on you when he was down on the cross. He had mercy on you when the blood came streaming down his body. He had mercy on you when he never said a mumbling word. He had mercy on you when he forgave the sinner beside him. He had mercy on you when God decided to die by some folk who he created. He had mercy. So he told the demon-possessed man, Now go, that had been demon-possessed man. Now go tell the folk what I have done to you. That's all a living testimony is about. That you walk different, you act different, and you be different. You don't have to tell a testimony. You just have to walk a testimony. You don't have to tell anything. You just have to act it out. You don't have to say anything. You just got to be about it. That's what a living testimony is. Oh, I feel the Spirit of God coming on to me. Kenny, my brother, come here for a second. I need you to help me out. Because when I thought about this text, I thought about something that Kenny has sung. Now, I had no idea that Kenny was going to be here. But I found out. I am a living testimony. I am a living testimony. Can you just sing that song for us a little while?